Hackett has given the goal. Arsenal have stolen a goal here.
Okay, this week we're joined by Keith Hackett, the former FIFA referee who refereed in the 1981 FA Cup final between Manchester City and Tottenham Hotspur, and also in the 1988 European Championships. Thank you for joining, Keith.
Pleasure. Good to meet you, Chris.
How are you today?
I'm fine. Obviously, still trying to get used to the Premier League on TV.
Yes.
And no crowds, no fans, and critiquing referees' performances, something that I do just as almost as a hobby, really.
Indeed.
Not necessarily to criticise, but to actually see some of the shortcomings, because unless people understand how difficult refereeing is, and the fractions of seconds that you've got to make a call, then there'll never ever be a time when they appreciate the man in the middle and the task that's in front of him. You know, and when you look at the Premier League, normally the games are beamed to 211 countries, watched usually by about 2/3 of the world's population. And I think also people forget that you're managing a massive amount of asset in players' values to keep them safe from hurting each other through the laws of the game and application of the laws of the game.
Yeah.
And then you're trying to create a sporting spectacle. And by that I mean not suppressing the game at the very highest level, and ideally keeping 22 players on the football field. It's not an easy task, and it gets more and more difficult, I would think.
I've never really thought of it that way, but it's there's certainly one way of thinking that, you know, the amount of pressure that the referee has to go under at any one given time.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're looking for high levels of accuracy, and you know, you're making several hundred decisions in a game. You don't always stop it. You've got to determine, is that a foul or not a foul every time two players come together. Is the ball out of play? Is it not? You've got people helping you, and then you're working within effectively 17 laws, and you're interpreting those laws hopefully accurately to determine the right outcomes.
Indeed. And it must be a sort of a difficult situation for the referee without a crowd at the moment. Do you think you would have been able to cope with that, sort of the shift from having crowds?
Well, I think that what we've got to understand is that, you know, if you take my own career, I spent 12 years in local parks, and there was one man and his dog, you know, and everything that was said, if there's half a dozen spectators, everything that's said you can hear.
Yes. Whereas
in front of a big crowd, it's a huge noise, and you don't hear the individual comments.
No.
And in fact, I always found it to stimulate the adrenaline flow, and I think it kept you on edge, never fearful, but always trying to be aware and alert in terms of the game and how the game was being played.
You say about them.
Sorry. You know, you're managing 22 players, managers and everyone else, and everybody's got a different personality and everybody's got an opinion for what's just taking place.
Sure.
And so at the end of the day, you're paid at the very highest level to make the decisions. But people think that referees come immediately from wherever to referee the Premier League. They forget the long apprenticeship that every referee has to go through. Most referees have served up to 10 years and beyond. There's 30,000 referees in this country. You know, certainly less than 100 get to the very highest level. And then you're down to something like 20 at the Premier League level. And then of that, you've probably got 6 or 7 that's international, FIFA international referees. So it's a long pathway, it's a long journey, and there's a huge dropout. I think somewhere in the region of about for whatever reason, about 7,000 of those referees give up every year, and another new lot of 7,000 come into the game. So,
Wow.
yeah, it's you know, I mean, before I did 12 years at grassroots level, and sometimes that was refereeing 3 games a week. You were building the experience, and then the next promotion was onto the Yorkshire League, which was top amateur level,
Right.
in Northern Premier League when that was formed, which was suddenly semi-professional. And then you're waiting for that call to be put on the Football League line. So you're a linesman first, and then if you're reasonably competent at that, then you'll get promoted to the Football League. But you know, the fallout is enormous.
Yeah.
And throughout my career, I was an amateur in a professional environment. You know, I was on the Football League and the Premier League for 23 years, which is a long haul. 2 of those were the Premier League when it was first formed, and 10 of those were at international levels. So it was how bag would travel. And so when I retired from that, the if you like, the Football League and the Premier League, I then became a sort of referee assessor and then a referee coach, and then became the technical advisor to the Referees Association, or should I say the Association of Football League Referees and Premier League Match Officials, and then eventually became development manager for the Premier League and the select group. You know, I had a big say in terms of the need to go professional because the game was getting quicker. So yeah, long career.
Yeah, it certainly has been a long career for you, and you're still going now. You're still helping with various different projects, and certainly helping with the articles that you sent to me to publish on the blog at the start of each week, which so very grateful for that.
I hope I don't sound as too much as the guy that is the old fart, really, that is criticising referees for criticising's sake. You got to understand, when I did that cup final in '81, I got paid 35 quid. There was a choice, £35 or a medal. And so I chose the medal, obviously.
Of course.
And then throughout, I lost a couple of jobs because of football, needing time off to go and referee New Zealand via Australia.
Right.
Which then puts pressure on the mortgage that you've got to pay. At the same time, you're putting in a long day and then having to train or travel. So, you know, at one stage I was, the company I worked for was based in Romford. That was helpful when I had games in the south, go in the office during the day, referee a football match, drive home. So I was arriving home at, you know, sometimes 2, 3 in the morning.
Wow.
Because you did your own driving there, your own driving back.
Yeah, of course.
And then you had meetings to attend. So you had effectively 2 jobs. The one that's your professional career in industry, whatever that is, and the other, refereeing football matches. And you know, football matches only last 90 minutes, but sometimes, you know, you're going to New Zealand, and that's a week. If you're going to Moscow, it's 5 days as a trip. If you're going to Kazakhstan, it's a bit further. So all these things were brilliant, but they put pressure on the fact that, you know, you've got a high expectation as a sales and marketing director. You had to meet your sales targets, otherwise you'd be out of work. So it was an added enjoyment. It was a break away from all the things that you do in the week, because now the escapism really is you're on the same field as top class players.
Of course. Did the refereeing ever sort of come into play when you were sort of with your full-time job? Did people mention the games that you'd refereed, decisions that you'd made?
It never came into the job environment, other than I think when I was when I was appointed to the FA Cup final. I think then the company had a sort of monthly newsletter that it printed, and I think everyone was taken aback that all of a sudden this guy who they knew as their boss as sales and marketing director was actually going to referee a football match at the Premier League. I kept them very much apart, but it did help. When I was sales guy, it did help because I'd go into Lincolnshire, and if I were refereeing Lincoln, I'd said, "Do you want to come to the football match?" And then they'd come to the football match with me, and I'd walk them on the pitch. And the same, if you went to Newcastle or Old Trafford, much the same.
Yeah.
And they'd go, "Well, you can't get this even if you were sponsoring the game." I go, "No, this is special." So that was a benefit, I suppose, that helped the sales figures. But it at times it was tough. It was tough to get your training in, to get the matches in, and stay fit.
Yeah, it must have been tricky. And what got you into refereeing in the first place? What made you want to become a referee?
I played for a local team, and at that time, the county FA were trying to encourage players to become more knowledgeable in the laws of the game. And so I was a young apprentice in the steelworks, and went, right, fine, I'll have a bit of that. I'll go on behalf of the team. I was the team captain, and so I was almost volunteered to do it. And I went, invited to take a referee's examination. I took it with no intention of refereeing. And then we had some Saturdays where we hadn't got a game, and I got a call from the local county FA saying, "We'd really like you to referee their football match. Can you do this particular game?" And I had no kit, no whistle, nothing. I borrowed the lot, believe it or not, and walked across a football field at Intake School in Sheffield to referee Sheffield United Juniors and Hillsborough Boys Club. I refereed the match. It was on school field. It's still there. And the guys at the end of the match, this guy came up to me and said, "You really did well, ref. You handled that game. Really pleased with you. And how many games you've done? I haven't seen your name on the list before." And I said, "Well, this is my first." And he just said, "Look, my son's a referee on the Football League. Why don't I put you in touch with him and chat? They'll give you some advice." And that's exactly what happened. And then I found that I was enjoying refereeing more than I was playing. And so it was just natural that the next season, when asked, I became a referee and a member of the Sheffield Referees Association. So, the weekends were Saturday a game, Sunday morning a game. Midweek, I'd referee some five-a-side. And for a number of years, I refereed all the car dealers, spivs as I used to call them. All the car dealers in Sheffield, quite a few, would play at the YMCA on a Wednesday evening, and I'd referee the five-a-side football matches, and they were pretty feisty games. And then you'd sit back and it's, wanted to say, "I've got a Rolls Royce on the plot and I can't sell it, it's not moving. Shift it over to my side and we'll share the profit." And so you listen to these guys doing deals, and when I drove in Sheffield, I obviously knew where the plots were, and you're suddenly going, "Oh, that's a car they can't shift because it's front of house and it's not their car." So you suddenly saw the other side of life and a different sort of business. And some of those guys, one of them that sold the quality cars was the chairman of Sheffield FC by chance. So I used to see him on a Wednesday refereeing, and then obviously on occasions in the Yorkshire League would referee Sheffield FC. So he'd be mindful. After the first time of giving me some stick, I told him I'd get him back on a Wednesday, which I did. I sort of asked him to step aside in one game. He looked at me absolutely gone out, and I looked at him pretty firmly and said, "Look, payback time." And it was highly amusing. It was all taken in good spirit.
Always good.
But the one thing it learned, it was interesting because it taught me how to do that. Players weren't enemies,
Mm.
and actually, we all love the game. We all love playing it. One was I got the whistle. They've got the boots and the ball, and they tell you. They tell, look, Keith, thought you interfered a bit tonight. Were you on one? I go, no. You like it was pretty feisty, and he goes, well, just let it flow. And so you sort of develop this flair of a playing advantage, keeping the game flowing, managing players, having a quiet word. Sometimes that I think is lost now because players tend to be at whatever level in conflict with the referee, seeing him as the enemy, as not someone who can actually is part of and just there to enjoy it as much as they are.
Indeed.
Yeah. Mm.
So you're all lovers of the game, and it's that's the reason why you're there, really, isn't it? And
Well, I don't think you're ever going to be rich I used to say that as a referee, but in fact, Plattenberg signed a massive contract in China last year. But I do think that at times I think we're undervalued, and I do think at times, I can remember in the 90s saying, at some stage referees are going to be earning £1,000 a game, and they used to laugh at me and say that'll never happen in football. That'll never happen, and I said, well, you watch. And then I started chatting with Sir Dave Richards and other people about professionalising the referees, and that helped in the setting up of the PGMOL, which is an organisation that deals with referees at a professional level.
yes, of course. So you then made your way up to the Football League. What were your first few games as a referee in the Football League?
Well, I think, in 12 years, what you have to do in that 12 years is establish yourself as a pretty good candidate in terms of refereeing. And you're going through the structure. There's a pyramid structure. So you're going through that pyramid. And you've got to prove yourself at every level. And of course, as you go up the ladder, the games become tougher, more physical, because they're playing for pocket money, or they're actually paying the mortgage by what they're earning, depending on the level of football. My first game on the Football League in the middle was Stockport County versus Northampton Town. And I remember that as though it was yesterday, trying not to be distracted by the aircraft flying over the ground, because it's directly on the runway flight path of Manchester Airport.
Oh, right.
And so you can actually see the writing sometimes of the Boeing 747s when they're going across, and when you blow the whistle, you can hardly hear it. But you remember that. I remember that game because as I'm coming off the field, the players were generally happy, and the policemen sat on the steps of the where the stand is. They were sat on the steps where I went out, and they just tapped me and said, "Hey, ref, I think you've had a good game. Well done."
Right.
And it's those sort of timeouts that you get that encourages you in terms of refereeing. And so then the next big game I had was at Lincoln, where Graham Taylor was the manager.
All right.
And I refereed there. It was the first time I'd refereed a match under television. Yorkshire Television covered it. So this is my second or third game. And it went well. And then on the Tuesday after that game, I got a phone call from Graham Taylor saying, "Hey, well done. Thought you did really well." Chatted through the game. And so, sometimes you see conflict between referee and manager, and it's not always the case. Somewhere in these files, I've got a letter from Sir Alex Ferguson praising me for my career in football. Yet, if you then go on any search engine for Keith Hackett, you'll see that I was always in conflict with Sir Alex, particularly when I was boss of the PGMOL.
It's the bits you don't see.
I had to be strong.
It's the bits you don't see, do you? The sort of the referees, sort of, they're normally the ones that are the subject of the abuse, the ones that get. Because
Well, I think effectively that the scenario is that they're the excuse, aren't they, for a poor performance. Let's blame it on the ref. I mean, look, that's the tradition in football. Let's blame the referee for everything. And if you're passionate about your own club, then the referee's against you. You go into that game with that view. Most people go into that game saying, you know, they look at the team sheet and go, "Oh, we haven't got to put up with them again."
Yeah.
Precondition. Praise for a referee is scarce in that sense. It does come, but it's usually out of the public gaze.
Exactly. It's not. Yeah, being a fan myself, it is like you say. It is easy almost to blame the referee. And
yeah, I think that most times that when you're in the company of people who might have had a go at you in the past, then in those situations you get you know off the record, you'll get chats and all that goes with it. But I think every referee's has to be almost like he has to be a leader, but he also has to communicate well, not only with the players but people away from the game, to demonstrate one, accuracy in terms of laws and law interpretation. Why did he do that? You know, the assumption is because there's 22 cameras at every Premier League game, the referee will see everything that the camera sees, and that's not the case, because he might have a player in front of him, or he's been caught and he's off the pace. You know, there's suddenly a breakaway and you're chasing the top class players who are in possession of the ball and can run quicker than you. And then you're out of position and miss the challenge.
Right.
That's why I'm a supporter of technology to bring some balance into refereeing, to actually say, look, you know, I'm the guy that introduced the communication kits, and when I saw them at rugby at Twickenham, and I'm not a rugby fan, but I wanted to listen, so I went to Twickenham. I was guest of the IRB, listened in, and immediately then came back to Premier League and said, look, I want to introduce communication kits. Those are standard kit now around the world. You know, and then when we looked at creating a lifestyle change for the new referees, the Premier League referees, because the game was getting quicker, then how we're going to measure that? Because they're not, unlike a football team, they're not here every day, or you know, they're just not. They're here for 2 or 3 days every fortnight. So we introduced polar heart monitors, which were downloaded to sports science. So all that aspect of refereeing changed quite dramatically when the Premier League and the PGMOL were formed. It became much more professional. Training, the game was moving from endurance to explosive dynamics. And so we had to change all the patterns of training, nutrition, recovery, all those sports science things that were remote in my day. We just trained running around a football pitch forever, or doing half a marathon. And when we'd done it, we thought we were great. We didn't even know that we had to sprint and all the things that went with it. We did it naturally. But the game, we were on cue at that time in terms of pace, but Premier League took it to another level. And then the change in law with the back pass created extra pressure, physical pressure on referees.
How was that exactly?
I think that was in the 90s.
Yeah.
Probably, you know, early 90s, I think. And it was a major change. It was one of those laws that was terrific. It's been a huge success, but it didn't have to put pressure on the referee.
It was definitely sort of a tactic to play the ball back to the goalkeeper, who could then pick the ball up and just waste some time. Certainly, sort of wasn't.
Yeah, I mean, the old argument still exists, doesn't it, in football? There's a difference in law between time consuming and time wasting, and in reality, with the skill sets of the real technicians in football now, the manager as a team of sports science around him, technicians, and that enables this whole picture of measurement of performance and time with the ball on the field. And if you're a slightly indifferent team to the one that's running away with the league, and you come to face that team, one of the ways is your expectation might not be, well, we're going to get a win here. The very best we can expect is a draw. And then the very next thing is, if we actually spend more time consuming time and don't allow the opposition the ball, then they're not going to score. And so they're all tactical moves that come into play where that type of team is trying to slow it down.
Yeah.
And that slowing down can create frustration. So modern referees have to be much more technically aware of the tactics that are going to be employed. And sometimes the impact of a substitution change, and the players that you're refereeing. So you're not going into a game with a marked card, but you're going in prepared. You know who your players are. That's going to be difficult. You know the players you can talk to, and you know the players that you should stay away.
And that was all part of the preparation, would it be, for a referee before a game? They would know who would potentially.
Well, I mean, I think some of that's lost at the moment. But I mean, I always used to use Pierluigi Collina as the model, because he would tell you which foot the players had preference for. His own work was phenomenal, and that made his task on the field much better.
Yeah,
because he could anticipate better, because he knew what the likelihood is. He knew the players that would create the problems, and therefore, we all built that skill set. We knew that sometimes the guy that looks like the angel and butter won't melt in his mouth is the real assassin. And then we've got players who they're wearing, club colours, and they think that, we're millionaires and we can get away with anything.
Yeah. There must be some sort of referees that nowadays must look up certain, sort of which players would be like I say, the troublemakers, the players that would waste the time, the players that might, cause the potential bother. And like you say, with Collina, he would prepare and know about. So.
Yeah, and I mean, I was able, as the boss of the PGMOL, to encourage modern referees, as I call them, people like Howard Webb and Mark Lamberg and others, to have a greater awareness of understanding the game that they're going to referee and how they manage the players and how they deal with them. But it's down to them. It was down to them, not, I think, because they have the teams frequently, they got to know the tactics, they got to know who the difficult players were, the ones that were open, the ones that would hide, all those sort of scenarios. But then the game is unpredictable anyway. There's never two games alike. So you just have to take the game as it unfolds in front of you and deal with things as they come as efficiently as possible, without interfering with the performance.
Sure.
I liken it often to say that the referee is the conductor of an orchestra, and with that he's got a whistle and hand signals where the conductor's got his baton. And what that guy does with the baton is he's looking at a score. The referee's looking at the laws of the game, and he has got the tempo and the beat of the game, the orchestra, and the referee's the same. You can be a referee who interferes by blowing up for everything. And refereeing is easier every time there's a foul, you blow up. The skill set of a referee is to keep the game flow and to play advantage, but at the same time control 22 players within a set of laws.
It's management of the game as well as sort of.
Well, it's management of the game, and I mean, effectively, I think that the one thing I dislike is reactive referees rather than proactive. The best referees are the one proactive, in my opinion. they're proactive at preventing things happening.
Right.
They're not influencing the outcome of the game. They're influencing the behaviour of players. And to do that in a fairly authoritative way without belittling the players.
Of course.
And they're all tactical things that you can develop in doing that, you know, rather than go to the player who's facing you, come here, as though he's a dog. Actually, you can say, look, come and join me at point C. So if he's at A, I'm at B, let's join at point C of the triangle. Come and join me, I need a word.
There's definitely a lot more to it than I've ever imagined.
Well, I mean, and then, of course, the thing is that, you know, the spectators think then the referee's saying the next time you do that, you're going to be yellow carded.
Sure.
Well, the next time he does something, it might not be a yellow card offence.
Indeed.
So what you teach young referees is, look, I want an improvement. And you're not saying what you want an improvement in, but you want an improvement, and you're leaving your options open to, I want an improvement in tackling, I want an improvement to stop dissent, you know, I want improvement of behaviour, all those things. But you've still got options.
Sure.
Whereas if you say, the next time you do that, I'm cautioning you, you've closed the option book.
So if I could go back to your career yourself, how did your usual match day routine go? Did you have set superstitions, like some players have superstitions? How would your day, if you had a set sort of day?
Well, I'm you know, Dickie Bird lives up the road from me in Barnsley, and he used to go when he had the test umpire down in London. He'd arrive like 9 o'clock, 8 and 9 o'clock.
Really?
But you know, really early. And to some degree, I'm that person.
Yeah.
I always used to get to the ground very early, 2-3 hours. I got to know the groundsman quite well. They tell me the state of the pitch. They're sometimes helpful, and sometimes very helpful. I mean, I can remember going to Bury one day, and I'd arrived about 10 o'clock, 3 o'clock kickoff. And the groundsman says, you're very early. And I go, yeah. Do you want a cup of tea? Yeah. And so he made me a cup of tea. We sat there chatting. And then he disappeared for a bit and came back. And he had 2 meat pies on a plate. And I always remember because I said, you know, my meal, pre-match meal, tended to be toast.
Right.
And a cup of tea, and it was at that, really. And he looked at me, and I looked at him. I said to him, "You don't expect me to eat that meat pie, do you?" And he goes, "Yeah, I do." And I go, "Listen, I'm not eating it. I'm sorry. Thanks for the effort. I really appreciate it." And he goes, "You know, Keith, you ought to have this pie. I'll keep it here." And I go, "Well, I'll not eat it." And he goes, "Look, best have that pie here." And as he was walking out the door, he turned and with a smile on his face said, "It's one less to throw at you." You know, just remember that. It's one less that the crowd can throw at you. Brilliant. I thought that was, yeah, those sort of things.
Yeah.
And so I got to know those people. But you arrived early, and then you have to prepare. I mean, you obviously, you know, everybody thinks professional grounds are prepared, but I'd remind you of, you know, I showed you before we started the interview a painting or a drawing, a Trevelyan sketch of Jack Taylor.
Yes.
Probably the best English referee, along with Howard Webb, that we've ever produced. And Jack, of course, did the 1970 World Cup final with all the ceremony, all the pre-match ceremony, all going on, and he's going to referee the football match. And it's all to a specific time. And he waited and waited. The crowd cleared off the pitch. And then he delayed the kickoff, missed the time slot for the start because there were no corner flags.
Wow.
Corner flags are compulsory.
Yeah, of course.
It was a measure of the detail that sometimes referees have to be involved in.
Well, it's a like I say, compulsory thing. You think that even a standard Sunday league game would have a corner flags, let alone a World Cup final.
Yeah, I mean, I you know, Premier League games, I've actually tied the net to the post on the odd occasion.
Oh,
Just there's a
really?
gap. Yeah, absolutely.
Gosh.
So you don't take everything for granted.
No.
And then I think what people fail to understand, there is a set procedure. So you do arrive early, you do have a pre-match meal, whatever that is, a sandwich or something. It's changed now. And then on the Premier League, when we brought in format where 1 hour 15 minutes before kickoff, the security guy come in.
Mm.
They give you an indication of fans where they're going to be sighted in the ground, how many, and you've got to understand that came up in the era when some of the crowds were pretty vociferous and threw cushions and chair seats and all that goes with it.
Mm.
And so in that sense, they will tell you the procedures. You know, you can't suddenly blow your whistle and say the match is off. Because what you've got to do is you've got to ensure that policemen on traffic duty, that if you're in London, the underground is available. Trains, the special trains that have carried supporters are all ready. The drivers are ready. The people, the traffic lights are going to be switched off so that the flow can go of fans exiting the stadium and all that goes with it. So all those are parts of the pre-match planning.
Gosh.
And then 1 hour before kickoff, the manager and the two captains come into the dressing room and you exchange team sheets. So that's a rough idea of the procedure. In European games, Champions League, there's a minute clock countdown. You know, because what you've got to understand is that when you've got TV on an international basis, or even TV at the Premier League, if you were to kick off 1 minute early and a goal is scored, and you're the guy sat in wherever around the world, Aussie or whatever, you switch on to watch your team and you miss the first goal. So what's happening here?
Yeah.
So that's why you have the if you like, the controller, the Sky or BT controller at the side of the pitch, indicating to the referee when to kick off. So it's an orchestrated start because it's an event.
I remember going to an NFL game at Wembley with my dad and my granddad, and I remember somebody pointed out, he said that guy over there is that he waved, and all his job was to wave a flag at the sign of the end of the adverts, ready to start the game. You know,
Yeah.
it's crazy that the sport can be.
Well, I mean, in the early 80s, before. Well, I did the cup final, and then I was invited to be guest referee on the North American Soccer League. And so I did 8 weeks on the NASL, and we had advert breaks during the game. And so if a player went down injured, or he finished on the ground from not a foul challenge, you'd say to him, "Stay down." He'd go, "What do you mean? Stay down? We're having a break."
That's
And then
good.
you'd signal the stoppage of the clock by doing that.
Right.
And then you're watching you've got a minute, you've got two watches, one's just timing the minute. When a minute's up, you're doing that. And the guy's giving you the okay on the side of the pitch. So that was part of it all. And of course, you had musical interludes with the games in America. So it was all completely different.
Yeah, they fit the sport.
Yeah, I was telling a story. I was scheduled to do New York Cosmos against Vancouver Whitecaps, and I was staying in the Adelphi Hotel in New York, lovely hotel, and picked up by a cab that was going to take me to the ground, commissioned by the North American Soccer League, and so I'm in the cab going, and there was an accident in Lincoln Tunnel, and so we were going out to Giant Stadium, and so we were stuck in traffic. And then all of a sudden, my cab driver jumped out of the cab and started shouting Hispanic. And then all of a sudden, he opened the door, and in walked Carlos Alberto,
Wow.
the Brazilian 1960 World Cup, who played for New York Cosmos. I said hello, and he said, "The problem?" And he goes, "Yeah." And he said, "I'm really worried about the time."
Yeah.
And I said to him, please don't worry about the time because I'm the referee. It'll not start without me. And so, but then 100 yards from the ground, I suddenly realised I'm in the same cab as Carlos Alberto. I'm thinking, if we step out of the cab, he's instantly recognisable. I'm not, but I'm carrying a big Adidas bag with my kit in. And so I stopped the cab and I walked 100 yards, a couple hundred yards, took a different entrance into the ground than Carlos Alberto, who went down the players' tunnel.
Wow.
So yeah, amazing.
It's a different world, sort of a different sport over in America. Their games come on much more sort of professionally. It was back in, like you say, in the 90s.
Yeah, you obviously, I missed. Although I refereed George Best in England, I didn't referee him in the North American Soccer League. But there were Rodney Marsh, there were, Peter Beardsley, for example, and there were a lot of Leeds players, Peter Lorimer and the like, playing for Vancouver Whitecaps. So yeah, it was 30 games in 8 weeks, and that was the first taste I had of, if you like, professional refereeing. And all of a sudden you were getting fitter, you were sharper in your decision making. And again, I think those are things that influenced me later on in my career to suggesting, well, the Premier League needed to have professional referees.
Of course. And that came in. When was it that professional referees came in?
Late 90s. I finished refereeing 95, 96, something like that. And I then decided I finished with football now completely. I stopped short. I upset everybody because I was due to go to the end of the season, but I refereed Man United, Liverpool. And I sat in the dressing room and said, right, that's it. That's my last game. And people looked at me and I've said, well, what better way to go out as a referee? And that's what I did. And the FA were unhappy. The Football League were very unhappy because they're saying that, but we've scheduled your games for the end of the season. I go, yeah, I'm calling when to quit. This is it. And I left the game on a good note, and it was the right time and the right thing to do. So I had no regrets. But I'd been on the list for 23 years. So one of the longest serving match officials. So I'd done my bit for the game of football. But then, I thought I'd literally walk away from the game, but that's almost impossible to do.
Yeah.
And that's when I decided I'll do some assessing of performance of the referees. Got into then training referees. And then eventually invited to become the development manager of the new organisation that had influenced the league to start. And then after 18 months, Philip Don quit. I thought he did a good job, but they moved him on, and eventually they persuaded me to take over. And that's when I made some dynamic changes. I suddenly went, right, you're professional. You're going to have levels of accountability. And then further down the stretch, I once had a discussion with the manager who said, well, you're like policemen, really. If a policeman does anything wrong, the police investigate. So, well, they're skilled at doing that. Yeah, referees refereeing referees. Yeah. Guy in the stand marking the referee. I go, well, it's all open. It's transparent. He goes, yeah, great, yeah. No credibility, Keith. And that's when I went to the Premier League and said, look, there's lots of players and managers that are out of work. Can we persuade them to go and watch referees and talk to managers after the game and input a mark? And I think, with Mike Foster, who was then the secretary of the Premier League, and quite a guy that was pretty level-headed and straight guy, played football at a good level. So he supported that, and I think it worked extremely well. They had a guy called John Morton, who was, I think, a school teacher by profession, holding it all together. And there was a terrific working relationship, because he'd come in and go, I think this referee's had a bit of a poor performance. He'd tell me why, from his perspective. And I think that openness and transparency grew and helped to grow some of the referees, because we, I put in all different performance analysis and I introduced Prozan, so that when I talk to people like Sir Alex and Arsene Wenger and Sam Allardyce and all that, I could actually say, this is your game and this is where our referee stands, because they were using Prozan as well. And I think they're a bit surprised that when they said, well, how far does a referee run? I'm going, well, they're now running 11,500 meters per game, and 1,000 meters average at 7 meters per second, and they're doing 50 sprints. And that's equivalent to your players on average. Your players don't cover that distance.
It's the shuttle runs, isn't it? That's sort of the toing and froing between chasing.
Yeah, so what you're doing is you're beginning to, at the same time as well, I've listened. They were pretty good judges, the referees. Once you cut through all the dross that was there sometimes, they'd have different levels of trust. They'd say, well, he's a safe pair of hands, or look, this guy, he's a 75-minute referee. What do you mean by that? Well, if you look at all the stats, Keith, the last 15 minutes, he runs into problems. And so then we started looking at that individual referee as an example. And sure as eggs, he was a 75-minute referee. All his problems came in the last 15 minutes. So we then said, is he fatiguing? Is it fitness level? But we knew he passed the fitness test. And so we did the sports measurements, and it was not a fitness problem, it was concentration. So we then get the sports psychologist in and saying, look, how can we improve the concentration levels of this guy? And he said, well, I've got a simple formula, a rubber band. And one particular referee, nameless, used to have a thick rubber band around his wrist. And towards the end of the game, one of his assistants might say, time to flick the rubber band, which just is a bit painful, but it's a wake-up call. It's an action that stimulates the brain, that stimulates a reaction that gets the guy refereeing at a better standard.
That's a neat little idea. Sort of thing you would never see or even think about.
Yeah, well, the whole aspect. I brought in Professor Craig Mahoney, who was a top. He's now, I think, Vice Chancellor or Chancellor of the University in Scotland on the West Coast, and he was outstanding, an Aussie that built a terrific relationship with the referees. I wouldn't go into the meeting because he just wanted to deal with the referees on their own, not the boss. And he did things like body language and presence and dealing with pressure, all these things, and won over the confidence of a lot of referees, and he bought into what he wanted to do, and he made a difference, and that was all came about with the suggestion of Sam Allardyce, who said, "Had a thought of it." And so again, you learn some of these things and really all I wanted to be was the manager of the 21st team. But what I then brought in was something that a lot of people didn't like, and that was, I've dropped that referee, I've fired that referee, and people looking at me gone out and saying, this has never happened in refereeing. Well, it hadn't. But I'm saying, well, the difference is they're now paid professionals, and if they're expected to do a job, for example, if they're on a sales team and they didn't get the sales, they get a warning, and they might then be kicked out of the job. It's no different. My expectation is you're going to referee a football match, and you're going to get decisions right. And if you don't, I want to know why. We'll explore it.
Of course.
And then what we would do is we would have the fortnightly meetings. We'd put up good and indifferent aspects of refereeing and discuss openly. So there's a game. The referee's got the decision wrong, in my opinion. Right, come on then. Tell us how you got to that decision. Where were you? Talk us through it in front of all the other referees.
Really?
And then you'd get somebody like Graham Paul saying, well, I would have dealt with this in a different way. You came into it too late in terms of the action. You should have been back here judging that this is happening and deal with it. And then he'd go, have you not thought of 10-minute refereeing? And him and Graham Barber were big guys in 10-minute refereeing. And that was breaking a 90-minute game down and then recognising, look, with a signal basis of his assistants, you know, for example, I'm going to keep this game tight. This is Man United Liverpool. I'm going to be slightly invasive. I'm going to keep a grip on it. After 10 minutes, you know, how's it going, guys, from the touchline? And they're going, look, still a bit feisty. Keep the lid on it, which means don't play advantage. Hit the fouls when they occur, small fouls. Come in and impose your authority, and then slowly release it. And then it's, you know, do a signal to the linesman saying, look, I'm releasing a bit.
Sure.
I'm just going to let it flow and let it breathe, so that they're all on the same plane. And you know, I always regarded that as pretty good refereeing. It was, you know, I mean, again, Graham Paul's depth of knowledge in terms of refereeing was outstanding. I always feel disappointed that, okay, he went a little bit like pundit with the Daily Mail, but I have to say that what he wrote was accurate. I didn't find myself disagreeing with anything that he'd written, and that's the honesty of the guy and his forensic mind and his knowledge of refereeing. You know, I mean, it was sad in a way that he gave 3 yellow cards, because I think at that point, before that point, the noises I were getting from the governing bodies were that Graham's lined up for the final.
That's what he was known for, wasn't he?
Yeah, I mean, he was our top referee for a number of years. You know, he had people chasing him, make no mistake. You know, they were around it. We had some pretty good referees. And we had a good group, and you know, my business plan when I sat down and wrote it was to create a cadre of world-class referees, and that's where we were, you know. And we eventually, I'd left, and I think the year after, Howard refereed the 2010 World Cup final. So, yeah.
You never refereed in a World Cup final, but you did referee in the 1981 FA Cup final. What are your memories of and of course, sorry, the replay? What are your memories of both of those games?
Well, I think any referee in England has an ambition. Not everyone at grassroots, because, you know, we talk about smart objectives. We actually say, are these achievable? But I think we can all dream, and I think referees, if they have ambition, which they should have, because if you don't have ambition, you regress, you get stale, and all that goes with it. So we have an ambition. I had an ambition, and so being appointed to the 100th FA Cup final was amazing. I mean, I didn't expect it. I was a young guy. In fact, I became, I think, with Kevin Howley, from Newcastle, the youngest referee at that time to referee the cup final. The memories are terrific. I mean, you know, you go out, you referee the first game, you're asked before the kickoff, £35 or a medal. Remember, there hadn't been a replay at Wembley. And so I refereed the game. It was a tight game. I can remember in that game, Ricky Villa being substituted and walking around the perimeter of the pitch, dejected. And then at the end of it, I'd blown the whistle, 1-1. It was a cup final. It was okay from my perspective. I walked up the steps to meet the Queen Mother. I suddenly realised if she gives me a medal, I'll not get the replay. And she didn't. And so I'm now walking down the steps and greeted by the FA guy who confirms you're back on Thursday, which was a terrific boost. At the Thursday game, I love my night matches. There's something different about a match that's played under floodlights at night, and it just brings the atmosphere in. And it was electric. It was absolutely electric. I think there were 10,000 spectators less because for a night match the capacity was reduced.
Why was this?
I think just the security thing. So I think in the first game it was 100,000, and so 90 in the second, and of course it was a feisty game. Jerry Gower decided he was going to take pieces out of Ozzy Ardiles because someone had told him he was the match player. So I had to step in and give him a yellow card, and I can hear one or two players saying about time. So I'd obviously been a bit liberal with him. And then, I mean, Mackenzie scoring a brilliant goal for Man City. But then that darting run by Ricky Villa, I mean, it's sort of, I had the best view in the house. So I was chasing it down, and I nearly blew for a foul. It was only minor, but it was near the penalty area. So I was prepared to give it. And I didn't. I just, I should have sometimes. That I did manage to keep the whistle out of my mouth. And of course, Vicky scored.
One of the most iconic goals.
The one thing that I really enjoyed was people talking about the football match and not a controversial refereeing decision. So I escaped, and I think, I don't know where it is, but if you get any form of medal or trophy, whatever it is, when your career's over, if you want to reminisce, the last thing I wanted was to look at a cup final medal and say, oh yeah, I can remember that mistake and this mistake, because the first thing that comes to mind with referees is their errors. Those are the first thing you remember, not the good bits of refereeing. And so, yeah, here am I with other referees criticising colleagues in a way to actually, I think, sometimes express frustration that, one, they're getting away with it, there's no level of accountability, and they don't seem to learn from the mistakes. And then, of course, these referees are put under additional pressure because they're expected to operate VAR not in line with how the protocols are generally written and applied in Europe and in America. And you suddenly go, how can that be a penalty kick? And why has he missed that challenge? Why has that player stayed on the field of play? And I suppose it came to an end last Thursday when I'm sat there watching effectively 3 games. And I'm seeing in every game an error, which is avoidable, really avoidable.
What I might do, Keith, is just to cut the interview here and then, if possible, to carry on and do a second interview another time just to cover the second.
Let's do that. I think that's a great idea.
It'll give you a chance to sort of go through.
I didn't realise. Yeah, that's great. We'll do that.
That would be great. Thank you. So this will be short now, and then a second interview to cover the second half of your career.
Yeah. We'll talk about international games and that.
That would be fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chris. Cheers, mate.